Hi, I'm Courtney, and you are listening to Katakataka, a podcast where we gather researchers from the Philippines and get them to answer our questions about their field. This episode, we will talk about marine biology. Starting from grade 1, Filipino children learn that the Philippines is an archipelago surrounded by four main bodies of water and intersected by seas, rivers, lakes, and many more in between. What we call our yamang-dagat supplies us with around 4.65 million metric tons of fisheries every year and employs 1.6 million people nationwide.
Off the coast, there exists another world.
200 years ago, Captain James Cook's ship, the Endeavour, struck and held fast on a submerged coral reef, what we now call the Great Barrier Reef.
From the dawn of history, man has used the sea as a rich hunting ground. The vast mass of the sea continues to make life possible.
What is marine biology? How will climate change affect our fishery sector? And what are we doing about it? Here to answer our questions are
Hello, everyone. My name is Chona Vince Cruz-Abeledo. I'm an associate professor at the De La Salle University, and I teach biology. My research work has brought me from the mountains to the ocean, and I'm currently studying different organisms that are being grown in aquaculture. But we mostly specialize in mangrove crabs that grow in brackish water. That's the portion of the um, marine ecosystem that's halfway between freshwater and saltwater. And I'm also a science communicator. I have a vlog and channel called She Ensha, where I try to help empower fellow Filipinas in the field of STEM and also share fun information about science to the general public. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Princess Mordeno. I'm actually a chemical engineer, but I work in the La Salle University Shore Center as a research associate for coastal initiatives. We are projects in the center. We study corals. Now we study jellyfish, and we're also empowering local communities to do citizen science, helping us collect data on coral reefs and jellyfish.
Okay. Hello, hi everyone. I'm Jennifer Deauna-Mendoza. You can call me Jen. And I'm currently a university researcher in the Brother Alfred Shields Ocean Research Center, or simply Shore Center. And I'm also a part-time instructor in De La Salle University under the biology department. And I teach currently a marine ecology lab and systematics and biogeography lab as well. And my research focuses on marine ecology and how different coral communities react to different environmental factors in mostly in the Philippines. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the topic for today is marine biology. Can we get a simple introduction to what marine biology is?
Marine biology is basically a study of how marine organisms interact with the environment. So it can be as big as marine biologists can study as big as the whales in the ocean and as small as microscopic organisms in the form of planktons or phytoplanktons. So it can be as big or as small as those organisms. And marine biologists study how those organisms interact with the environment and also with people. So different biologists have different focus on studies. So for me, my background is on corals and coral reefs. So I tend to have a more visual view of the ocean, meaning I look at a coral reef and see, okay, so this place, why does this place have more corals in it as opposed to this other place that doesn't have a lot of coral? So different factors have an influence on coral reefs. So that's my take on it.
And what factors have you discovered determine whether corals will be more prominent in one area compared to other areas?
A lot of factors that affect growth and abundance of corals tend to have a human interaction with it. So it can be a major disturbance such as climate change, like warming of the ocean that causes corals to bleach, and that can cause long-term effects or long-term destruction on coral reefs. And it can be as a short period, such as tourists stomping on corals physically, and some corals tend to rejuvenate faster than others. So their recovery rates or the speed at which they can recover or they can heal can differ depending on the species. So hopefully in our work, we want to identify how coral reefs can help themselves and how humans can help coral reefs sustain their life for the next generations to come. So for example, can conserving or protecting a certain patch of coral reef, for example, Tubataha, can that Tubataha Reef's Natural Park, can that be a viable um, resource allocation for the country's coral reefs to help them be resilient to major disturbances? So those are some factors.
To add to Jen's take on the factors affecting how the health of coral reefs, there are also factors that are non-anthropogenic, meaning it's not caused directly, well, not directly caused by humans. For example, like pollution, that's like humans throwing their trash in the ocean. There are human activities cause climate change, and in indirect way, it causes the temperature of the ocean to rise. Ocean acidification is also a problem. It's these disturbances that are felt now because of human activities since the Industrial Revolution. For these impacts, we really can't do anything, but we try to study how corals react to it and maybe try and lessen the impacts of climate change and ocean acidification in coral reefs. And there's also a people element to it. So we work in Lian, Batangas. We have a partner community of fisher folks. They report to us bleaching. They are quite concerned. What can we do about it? And we can say, well, we can't do anything. The oceans are warming. It's sad to hear that, but basically we teach people to lessen the human impact so that the stressors on the reef are more or less, they can actually tolerate the stress because human impacts can now be lessened. Yun.
So this is your citizen science po, tama po ba?
Yes. Ito yung citizen science.
Okay. Can you tell us what will happen when the coral starts to bleach? How would it affect the ecosystem when it starts to bleach? Can you just parang siguro step by step on what will happen once the coral starts to bleach?
Okay. So, is it okay if I describe it?
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, sige. So what happens is when coral bleach, they turn white, right? So if you go snorkeling around the ocean, around the coast, if you tend to see white corals, it means it's not a healthy coral anymore because their partner algae tends to leave the organism or the colony because of the warm environment, and the coral is left naked. So when I say naked, it means they don't have a food source anymore. The algae is their food source. It gives them the nutrients and the food they need to survive. So when a coral tends to bleach, it will become sick, and it's dangerous for them to stay in that condition. So what happens is some corals will tend to have their color back if the conditions are improved. So for example, if the warming during the summer is normal, it lasts less than a month or probably just a few weeks, it can return to normal conditions. Di masyadong mainit, ganyan. However, as we have seen in the last few years, coral bleaching or the warming of the environment tends to be prolonged. Minsan mahaba ng 2 months to 3 months to more than 8 weeks. No, so when that happens and the coral is starved, that condition is prolonged. No, the corals tend to die, and when that happens in a lot of corals, the whole coral reef ecosystem is affected. So a major example of that is what happened in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, which is a highly documented event from 2016. If you guys have watched Chasing Corals, right? So that was a major issue at that during that year, and if that condition of the coral reef ecosystem is prolonged for a year or more than 2 years, probably the reef itself won't be able to replace the corals that they have lost. And when that happens, since corals are houses or habitats of fishes, the fishes will essentially lose their homes. This is where the baby fishes are born. This is where adult fishes produce baby fishes. So the whole ecosystem is affected. So if you lose fishes, you lose the next consumers, which is probably the sharks and other whales as well. So those are the interacting forces or effects that could happen if coral bleaching is prolonged. So I gave an example in Australia or the Great Barrier Reef, but here in the Philippines, there's an effort by the UP Marine Science Institute. Their movement is the Philippine Coral Bleaching Watch. So what happens is they put up a Facebook account and they encourage people to report bleaching. And with that movement, I saw the effort of people to post their pictures and post their videos. And not only did they learn about coral bleaching, people learned how to identify bleaching and certain diseases and to differentiate them from bleaching. And with that knowledge, I think help recreational divers or just tourists or just normal enthusiasts of the oceans. It helped them gain more further appreciation for what they are seeing underwater. It's not just, uy, ang ganda ng corals, bakit sila namumute? Hindi lang surface knowledge, because they were able to apply it and then they were posting in Facebook, and some scientists would react to it as well. So with that movement, it's a good project of the Marine Science Institute. But I don't know if they already published their results from that movement, but I hope they will soon. So that's my take on coral bleaching.
So you mentioned that the marine life will not be supported anymore if once the bleaching starts or it is prolonged. Dr. Chona, can you tell us about how that could probably affect mangrove crabs, which is your area?
Well, I think at its heart, we have to consider that the Philippines, as you mentioned earlier, is a largely archipelagic country. So if you can imagine, we have about more than 2 million square kilometers of territorial waters, including the EEZ. And within that area, about, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, or Ms. Princess, around 27,000 square kilometers of coral area. So that's a huge portion of our waters, and all of that is under our care. Now, because of the interaction of coral reefs, and the portion of the water na I can't help but think of that Filipino trait na meron tayo when you see something, nakakain ba yan? Because I think that's the part that I study, the portions na nakakain. And basically, if you look at the fisheries production of the Philippines, we produce around 4.7 million metric tons in about a year, which is valued close to $7.5 billion. So that's a lot of money. The fisheries industry is responsible for a huge portion or a significant portion of our GDP. And what Jen is saying is that coral reefs are actually at the heart of what keeps the life cycle of the ocean together. So even if the organisms live within or outside the reef, the cycling of the nutrients, the complex food webs, kung alin ang kinakain ng aling isda, kung alin ang kinakain ng aling sea urchin at crab, and so on and so forth, will eventually affect each other. So in our case, in the mangrove crabs and the alimango that we're studying, we are seeing that a lot of our fishers who grow mangrove crabs in healthy coasts, they often find it a little bit more straightforward to have higher outputs in a month or in a couple of months compared to those growing crabs inland. And I think it really is involved with a lot of the nutrient exchange, how the pH, the salinity of the water fluctuates. But I think when it comes to chemistry, Ms. Princess might be able to tell us more about that. But yeah, it's the interconnectivity in my perspective as someone studying the organisms we consume in the water. That's the part that really concerns me when it comes to maintaining our corals.
Yes. I agree kay Ms. Cho. Each habitat, like the mangrove, the seagrass, the coral reef, they have a part to play. They are interconnected and they support each other. So it does not make sense to only protect the mangrove, for example, and not care about the seagrass and the coral reef. So for example, the coral reef, they provide coastline protection. They protect the seagrass, which is further inland, and the mangroves. The mangroves naman and the seagrass, they serve as filters from runoff sediments and nutrients from the shore. So because these habitats are interconnected, it is important that we see these habitats as a unit. Kaya meron tayong laws like National Integrated Protected Area System because we want to protect a unit that is self-sustaining, interconnected, and they help each other. So yun ang importance nun. And nakikita yan ng locals, especially here in Leon. So we have a mangrove area in Sitio Cayrena. So they still propagate seedlings because they try to plant more mangroves. At the same time, they have a protected area right in front where they bring tourists. We bring students there. So they don't only get food from the coral reefs. They not only get fish. They earn from bringing tourists there. So sa Pilipinas, we have nice beaches. That's because our coral reefs are somewhat healthy. A healthy coral reef produces 1 to 5 kilograms of sand per square meter per year. So if sira yung coral reefs mo, you'd expect the beautiful white sand beaches to be gone in a few years. And we saw that when there's this project funded by BMB, it's Corva. Basically, they studied all habitats, and we saw that the coral reefs that are healthy are near the beaches that are accreting. So yung mga beach na nag-accrete, nag-move forward into the ocean, ay katapat ng isang healthy coral reef. So isa yun sa mga example ng interconnectedness ng habitat and the benefit that we get from them. 1 meter square of a healthy coral reef produces 1 to 5 kilograms of sand per year. Okay, so coral reef ay nag-house ng mga isda. So may isang kind ng isda, the parrotfish. Kumakain siya ng algae, pero since yung beak niya, very strong, so nakakain niya kasama yung substrate or yung substrate. Paano ko ba siya? The substrate, yung coral calcium carbonate under the algae, or basic kung nakakain niya naman yung corals, it's the skeleton of the corals. Tapos yung poop niya essentially is sand. And also, when the waves is crushed against the reef, nadudurog yung corals na patay na. Tapos eventually napupunta sila sa shore.
Okay. Kaya nagiging fine po yung sand.
Kaya nagiging fine yung sand.
Okay.
So yung sand ay galing sa fishes na, well, it's fish poop. And also from, nadudurog sila ng wave.
Pero medyo stupid question. So, lahat ng sand galing dun sa parrotfish? No.
Hindi lahat. Hindi lahat.
Okay.
Yung iba, dadurog na patay na corals. So yung rubble.
Okay.
Yeah, but when there's parrotfish, it's usually the softer, finer sand. So while Miss Princess was sharing us that story, I can't help but think how many high-valued things come from the poop of animals. Like yung high-value civet coffee, poop ng
Yes.
and then high-value, high-quality soft sand comes from the poop.
Ms. Princess, you mentioned before about non-anthropogenic causes for coral. Can you explain more of yung direct na effect ng tao dun sa coral reefs?
Direct effect ng tao? Unregulated, unreported. Yung illegal fishing, like the use of dynamite. Yung may movie before, Muro Ami. They actually destroy corals. They just want to get fish, but they're destroying yung kahanan ng fish, which is bad. It's not sustainable. And coral reefs take, a fully formed coral reef, took at least 6,000 years to get it fully formed structure. So, and when there's blast fishing, for example, dynamite fishing, that reef gets destroyed in a matter of minutes. So it's not good for the corals. It's also not good for the fishes. And in the long run, it's not good for the people because you destroy the home of the living thing ng fish na pinagkukunan mo ng source ng livelihood mo. Even pagkain.
How common is this practice until today?
Dito sa Batangas, meron kaming naririnig, pero locals would tell us na hindi yan dito sa municipal waters ng Lian, it's outside. But in the other parts of the country, like Northern Samar, for example, kasama ko si Jen dun sa trip na yan sa Biri, na malakas talaga yung blast naririnig namin underwater. Because there's this one town na yung livelihood nila is actually making yung makeshift dynamite for fishing. So, and we found yung hindi pumutok na makeshift dynamite underwater during that trip. So it depends on the area. It depends on how strict the enforcement is by BIFAR and the local government. And there's also an element of how do you balance the need for the people to eat, make a living, and protection of the ocean. These two cannot be separated. Kasi gagaya ng habitats, especially tayo, Filipinos, we are so dependent on the ocean because we are an archipelago.
So, can you say na mahirap i-convince yung mga fisher folk to stay away from this dangerous or destructive na practices?
That depends. For example, here in Lian, the people here know the value of having a healthy coral reef. Maybe because they've interacted with scientists a lot. That's one. And they've been taught by their grandfathers to just take what they need for the day. So medyo yung enforcement dito is not that hindi mahirap. In other parts of the country, mahirap mag-enforce because, for example, the LG will say, I cannot enforce the close season, yung bawal mangisda kapag nagsuspawn at nanganganak nangingitlog yung mga isda para hindi makuha yung mga babies. I cannot enforce that because wala naman akong mabigay na bigas or ulam. Ano yung kakainin nila? So, yung mga ganyan na kwento is very common when you go around coastal towns. So, that depends then on the culture. So, yung mga naturuan ng generations before them that the ocean is kind, but we have to take care of it. mas okay yung attitude nila towards it. Yung iba naman, kailangan ng konting help, especially in the socio-economic part of yun.
We will talk about the indirect causes of coral degradation later, like pollution and global warming. But for now, can you tell us about a memorable excursion that you experienced during one of your field trips?
I'm super curious since Jen was a student of mine before. I'm curious how their ecology field trip went. Kasi parang ang dami ko nang na-attendan na ecology field trip sa marine station and different areas. So it kind of blends in together for me. But I wonder if Jen can still remember her first field trip with Sir Al probably.
Funny enough, when I was in college, my ecology lab was not in the ocean. We went to a river in Lasal, Canlubang. So we measured water parameters there. But my first field work with Sir Al was actually my first day with the shore center. So we went to Lian, Batangas. We went on snorkeling. It was just my first day, pero Sir Al trained us already. So we were snorkeling around. I didn't know how to use my fins, but we learned on the spot on how coral reefs were formed, how coral reefs look different from one side of the island to another side of the island, depending on how the winds affect the ocean or affect the waves in that particular coral reef. So that was my first experience in fieldwork with Sir Al. Years later, I got to go to Bataha last 2018. So that was probably my most memorable excursion, not just because it was beautiful, in pictures and it's a popular diving site, but because you get to appreciate the marine organisms that you see there and that you won't be seeing in other places, such as in Batangas. The major example would be sharks. So a lot of people ask me, how did you react when you saw those sharks? Weren't you scared? So when you actually go to Tubataha, it's not that scary because the sharks are they won't really touch you. They'll just swim around, they'll move about their agenda or their business. They won't probably be feeding because they mostly feed at night or late in the afternoon. So we were just advised to just do about your business, do your work under water, and the sharks won't touch you. So that's a very interesting fact for me because we don't see a lot of sharks in Batangas swimming with us while diving, and it's the major reason is that Tubataha is a complete food web, or it means that shark is present there because they have food there, and there's enough fish for the sharks to feed on. And it's a very exhilarating experience because even if you don't go too deep, just a few meters below the surface, they will enlighten you with their very magical experience. So that's my memorable excursion on the field.
By the way, just since we mentioned him already, the Sir Al that we're mentioning is Dr. Wilfredo Licuan, and he's the director of the Brother Alfred Shields Ocean Research Center, or SHORE, of BLSU. So he's one of the forerunners of studying marine biology in BLSU, and is also a product of the UP Marine Science Institute. I think all three of us are connected to him somehow, and a lot of our wonder for the ocean has really been fostered by the existence of the Shore Center. In my case, I can't really remember any field trips when I was still an undergrad because my primary work was in molecular biology. So even if we did go on field trips, it's just one lab after the other. So I actually only started going on field as a faculty of the biology department of the LSU. And I remember this one field trip, this very first field trip in ecology that I accompanied. And the very first thing that Dr. Al said was, I'm bringing you all here so that you can see the coral reef, so you can appreciate it. but also to say goodbye. Because as what both Miss Princess and Jen earlier mentioned, there are some things we can't control. And therefore, with the existence of global warming, there's a huge chance that these beautiful ecosystems underwater will be disappearing soon. And I was so heartbroken because, hala, this is my first time going out to saying goodbye na agad. So parang, no. And then after that, Dr. Lagman, my PhD advisor, who's also a marine biologist from the Marine Science Institute, she took me to this seminar in Dumaguete. And we were also learning about molecular biology, genomics, and its different approaches to population genetics. But one of the field trips in that webinar, which I think I remember more than the actual seminars themselves, was to the Apo Island. And it's so crazy because we actually had typhoon signal number 1 at that time. And yet all of the marine biologists with us, no, we'll go. It's okay. We'll survive it. And I was like, what? What am I getting myself into? But it was just amazing that no matter how turbulent the waters were at the surface, the moment you dive under, it's just peaceful and calm. And I think at one point, I almost forgot the need to breathe when I saw a sea turtle. Like, it was the first time I saw a sea turtle, and I was trying to, keep pace with it so that it doesn't disappear. And then when I came out for air, I noticed I was super far away from the boat, and that's when I started panicking because I'm like, I don't know if I have enough strength to swim back. And Doc Menchie, Dr. Lagman was panicking, like, where's Chona? Where's Chona? Oh my God, I can't believe I lost her. It's the first time I took her out and she's missing. So yeah, I managed to find my way back with the food delivery because we had lunch on the boats. They had a food delivery system, and I'm like, can you please take me back to the boats? I'm lost. And yeah, that was one of my most memorable experiences with the ocean. So
food delivery sa water? Like my boat? Mapunta sa main boat
basically
ninyo?
they were cooking from the shore, and they knew we were on a dive. So it's a small boat that had binalot, so food wrapped in bamboo leaves, and they were delivering the food to us. So it was a turo-turo on the water. So like, ano po gusto niyo, adobo or ganyan. So it was a super cool system, especially since I think they have a famous dive spot in the area. So they have a food delivery turo-turo mechanism on a boat.
In a way, naiintindihan ko yung experience in Ms. Chona, because Ms. Cho, when we go out on field, we went through the hassle of preparing everything, and then we have to go out, and then if there's a typhoon, as long as the boatman says it's okay, we can still go out, we'd still go out, except for places like Palawan, medyo strict yung Coast Guard because it's a tourist destination. In most places, let's just go and do the surveys and then hope for the best. Totoo yun.
Scary.
Yeah, that is true. So there was this one time we went to Aligoy Island. It's an island 2 hours away by boat from Dapitan. And then we went there. There was a typhoon, and there's usually a calm before the storm. That is really true. So, for example, the forecast would say, oh, the typhoon will hit this area tomorrow, then we do all the dives today. So we went there, but then the typhoon picked up speed. It came earlier than expected, so the 2-hour boat ride became a 4-hour boat ride. And I was very, very worried because we're near Dumaguete, and the boatman, actually, the captain of the boat, we used a fishing boat. It's a really, really big boat. They navigate by sight. And if it rains, they can see the islands. They can see the islands, and there's no way of us getting home. What saved us actually is an offline map and a compass.
Oh,
So
wow.
we were already traveling like 3 hours, and we were wait, like it's the boat ride is supposed to be 2 hours. It's been 3 hours and we're not in the Pitan yet. So the boatman, the crew actually are a bit embarrassed to say that, ma'am, we can't really go home. We don't know the way home anymore because we can't see the island. So, quick thinking, with one of our teammates that time is very, very comfortable with the water. He's a Tausug from Tawi-Tawi. He thought of, okay, let's just get a GPS, get a compass, and then you sit with by the one who operates the rudder that steers the boat, and you just tell him what direction to go, and then we can go home. So that was really it was it was exciting, but I didn't really want to be like the headline the following morning, like 4 researchers from the La Salle University.
Oh no.
It's scary, but we when you've been in the ocean a lot, yung threshold mo for danger is a bit off. It's you have most of the time we do the research for the sake of science and for us to not have wasted effort in preparing for the trip. So that's the most exciting, I think, for me.
Aside from yung place, how about like marine life? Can you tell us like what marine life is fairly unique to the places that you have been to, or parang unique siya to the Philippines at least?
Whale sharks in Sorsogon.
Oh, yeah.
Pregnant whale sharks in Sorsogon. So they're very, very big. Indian trip, a research trip, but it was like we usually survey we set are about like 5 meters, so it's not really deep. But the big fishes or the sharks and the whale sharks, I haven't been to Bataha, so hindi ko alam kung anong itsura ng shark na nasa 3 meters lang from the surface. So I had one time I decided to go to Sorsogon para tingnan yung manta. So there was a deep dive in Manta Bowl. So majestic yung mantas and yung whale sharks naman. And what I appreciate about that trip is that they respect the animals there. So hindi nila finifeed. They don't promise that you'll see a whale shark today because we see them when they show up, and if they don't show up, it's okay. There is this respect for the animal and the behavior ng organism na yun. So that's what I appreciate there.
I think for me, I would like to speak for the invertebrates since those are the things I mostly study. But one of the things, I spent some time in the US for my dissertation, and I was under the director of the Friday Harbor Laboratories of the University of Washington. Her name was Billy Swala. And what she was studying were sea slugs. And when the very first time I came to the station, she was like, "You have to tell me all about the sea slugs in the Philippines." And I was like, "Oh, no, wait." So when I came back here and actually was lucky enough to have gotten more opportunities to snorkel and dive, I became more aware of these beautiful sea slugs. And a lot of them are actually endemic or unique to the Philippines. This is the only place in the world where you have them, from unique sea slugs from the genus Tritonia with tentacles. Some of them are neon yellow and neon pink. And it's quite amazing how they're found in some reefs in the Philippines, because some scientists would say they are actually indicators of the health of the ecosystem of the area. So the more of them you have, the healthier the ecosystem is. Of course, the pessimistic part of me would say, talaga, Philippines, healthy. but then again, the more you get to travel the Philippine coasts, and the more you see the traditional practices, or in communities where they still use the traditional practices, they are actually able to maintain the health of their environment, because a lot of the practices that we have are actually sustainable. It's when the concept of trade and greed comes in that's when things start to tip the balance. Pero yun, so many beautiful sea slugs. But to be completely honest, I am dead scared of touching them, or like I find them a little icky, pero they're still beautiful to look at. It's my husband who actually enjoys coming closer to them, and he even made amazing sculptures of them using pipette tips that we eventually left behind in Seattle for the laboratory to display. But yeah,
Oh.
for me, I am speaking for the beautiful invertebrates that we have here. Definitely one of a kind.
So, in terms of a memorable excursion where we found unique marine organisms here in the Philippines. So, I haven't been outside of the Philippines diving. So, hopefully one day I get to. But for me, probably the most interesting for corals now is when we went to Palawan, specifically in Coron, Busuanga. So we had an expedition trying to look for certain vulnerable corals, vulnerable or endangered, meaning there are less abundant.
Actually, one of my questions though at the back of my mind, like how do they, like, di ba normally may numbers sila? How do you compute po for those?
Ecology 101.
Sorry.
It involves sampling techniques called transects and quadrats, where you deploy grids underwater and use the images that you get from those grids to basically count the number of corals, the number of reefs. But mostly it's about coral cover. What percentage of that specific area is covered by a particular species. So it's not realistic kasi to actually survey 100% of the reef. Sometimes it's too large, sadly, sometimes it's too small. So you get a portion of it, a statistically significant portion. When you say statistically significant, you sampled enough of it that you think it's representative of the whole picture. But what's interesting is the team from shore, and I'll let either Jen or Princess talk about this. They actually devised this very, very unique system for doing that transect quadrat sampling method. And I'm not sure if it's patented, but it's a very unique system that they've actually taught to local communities all over the Philippines. So Jen, Princess, take the floor.
Okay, I'll let Jen describe the shore way of surveying coral reefs, and I'll discuss paano equivalent naman niya sa local communities.
Basically, from what Miss Chona said, no, ecological surveys underwater. So basically put measuring tape essentially, and we take photos, and from those photos we get to identify how much of a species is available underwater. For example, if you say this certain reef has 15% or 15% of that reef is composed of corals, it's technically a low number, or relatively low number compared to other parts of the Philippines. And more than corals, we also look at other organisms, like how much algae is in it, how much macroalgae, or their indicators of coral reef health as well. So that methodology is more or requires a lot of money, because you need to go diving, requires a lot of people, because it's time consuming. So you need more tanks, you need more manpower for that. And so the Shore Center created this citizen science methodology in as a way to help local communities monitor their own coral reefs in their own localities. So, Princess, you could probably describe more on that.
Okay, so for the citizen science method of monitoring coral reef, we actually survey the same area, so same size ng ginagawa sa shore, which is a 25-meter by 75-meter area. So masyadong malayo naman yung langoy. But the thing is, for this method, you don't need to be a certified scuba diver, and you don't need to know yung genus or ng corals to be able to process data. So we thought we take pictures, 30 pictures of the reef by free diving. So we designed a monopod that is folding para siyang payong so that it takes less drag when you skin dive and when you ascend to the surface. At the same time, we teach the locals what corals are. So, well, kung fishermen to, they usually know ano yung corals. But sometimes, yung pag-tease out ng details, like how do they differentiate from the soft corals and the hard corals, yun yung mahirap. So we actually taught them what corals are, kahit yung soft corals na well, it's a hard coral pero mukhang soft coral. So, and then we use the same scales. So our methods are actually comparable. At the same time, because we take pictures, they can actually send us the picture so that we can process the data from the images. So we can get more information because pictures are permanent records of the state of the reef nung ginawa nila yung survey. One application of this is to quantify bleaching. So last year, July 2020, pandemic, nag-report ang community ng bleaching. They were alarmed and they want us to monitor. Can you quantify the bleaching for us? They were trained with this method, but they don't have the funds to do it kasi lahat ng funds for ng LGU got allocated to the COVID response. So what we did is actually called one personnel from DNR Senro Calaka to assist the local community. So isa lang yung tawag namin sa kanya is team scientist. So his responsibility is to make sure that they take good photos, that we can actually use the photos to get information about bleaching. And then the locals, yung mga mangingisda, did the surveys. And we actually got to quantify bleaching in July 2020. And then we didn't even have to go to Batangas. So there is value in training locals to collect information, especially now in the pandemic. It's difficult to travel. And if you have locals that are empowered like that, imagine expanding a team of scientists, not 20. And for each scientist, you have 6 more 6 people from the local communities. So yung manpower mo gets expanded exponentially. Konti lang yung marine biologists sa Pilipinas, and we need all the help that we can get. So training locals is actually a good thing. So yun yung value ng method na yun. And if we can have the same for fish or for inverts, much better. But hindi kasi ako nag-study ng fish and inverts. So, pero meron naman may project naman before ang shore, funded by the Oscar M. Lopez Center to develop methods for fish and inverts. But hindi pa siya masyadong na-utilize. Yung corals lang yung medyo nagagamit.
How can we, so we now know yung destruction, and how can as an individual, how can we help preserve these corals and make sure that they live longer? And what are big things that the government should be focusing on to prevent their deaths?
I'll start at least in when it comes to natural resource use, since most of our research is in aquaculture, or at least in the use of marine natural resources. I think as individuals, it would be good for us to be aware of the things that we eat that come from the ocean. There are certain fish that are sourced sustainably, whereas there are also unsustainable practices when it comes to fishing. So as much as possible, we have to be aware. And ideally, the best fish to eat is the one that is sourced locally in your area. So, or at least those that can be grown in aquaculture in a less what we call intensive way. Kasi at the end of it, I think if you've watched any of the recent documentaries about the ocean, overfishing is such a huge problem. And this also affects our coral systems. Again, kasi lahat sila interconnected. But at the end of it, current practices in aquaculture are also not quite perfect. We still have issues on runoff, yung excess food, nutrients, and antibiotics running towards the ocean, overproduction, and therefore we don't really consume all of the things that we produce because of the concept that somebody will buy if we overproduce. So it's basically a balance. So for me, I think what we can do, especially since we enjoy eating a lot of the resources that come from the ocean, is responsible consumption. Know where they come from, know how they're grown, and try to help in figuring out more efficient solutions when it comes to growing all of these organisms. And in line with that, I guess at this point, I would like to introduce our team, which Ms. Courtney is a part of. We're the Crab Tech team from DLSU, and we're currently involved in developing applications that help make mangrove crab farming in the Philippines a little bit more sustainable. And this includes developing the mobile application called Crabifier that helps in species identification of mangrove crabs. So our fishers don't have to overcompensate in order to get more income. So they don't have to overharvest because they're now getting the species that they want. And then at the same time, we're also developing systems called the Alinmango system that helps fishers figure out the best source for their crablets so that they don't end up harvesting and buying crablets that won't survive in their fish ponds. So with these interventions, we hope to help make the aquaculture systems here in the Philippines a little bit more efficient and therefore less harmful to the environment.
I just realized this probably a few weeks ago because I wanted to travel for personal reasons, not for work. So I wanted to go someplace, probably a beach, to just relax, to get away from the city. Not now, but probably sometime late this year or probably next year. And then I realized how many people are already going to the beach, even though there's a pandemic. And I realized us Filipinos like to travel. So probably once enough of our population is vaccinated, the tourism industry will be back, will be growing faster than anticipated, because everyone is, what's the right term, sabik, to travel, to go out, to go to the beach, to go to Boracay, things like that. And I want to help promote responsible tourism to people because when we become tourists, we sometimes forget that we're visiting a natural environment that is not necessarily our home. So we have to respect the organisms that live there. For example, if you're a tourist as a free diver or as a scuba diver, I would like people to help the ocean by just simply respecting the ocean, by not destroying the corals or not writing on them, and be responsible tourists. And more on that, by promoting responsible tourism, tourists should be able to look at how a tourist spot or tourist area should be managed. So certain areas in the Philippines are good in terms of implementing the certain regulations, like your Solid Waste Management Act. You can see that most tourist areas are well managed naman, but some areas are getting polluted unnecessarily or very irresponsibly. So a big example that I got to experience 2019 was when we went to La Union or LU, as the young generation call it. So when I went there, I was so excited because it was my first time, and there was a lot of people there. So there was a lot of people there, and I was so shocked that it was a huge, wide. It was a wide beach area with beautiful, beautiful waves, but there was so much trash in it. So at the surface, you get to think now, okay, so we can just pick up the trash, but then there's a lot of it that you can't help the trash getting into the waters already. So a short term effect of that is fishes will tend to eat those plastics. They'll think of it as food, and eventually humans will get to eat those fishes as well. And then with that comes with the plastic. So in order to help the ocean be healthy or be sustainable, I want people to be more responsible tourists, especially once the pandemic is over or slowly traveling will be allowed in the next few months. Hopefully we get to be more responsible tourists. And governments should supplement that with stricter enforcement of certain rules and regulations. So we have really strong environmental laws in the Philippines, but I think it lacks implementation and guidance, especially to local government units. So if we look at certain laws like Solid Waste Management Act, a lot of it is very commendable because it tells us that the responsibility falls on the barangay level to really manage the garbage and the waste disposal of a certain locality. However, they don't have the capacity to do so. They don't have money to do so. So they don't know how to recycle. They don't know how to separate the waste, the biodegradable from the non-biodegradable, and things like that. So hopefully tourist areas in the provinces of the Philippines will be supported more of the local governments and also the national governments as well. So that's my take on how to help the marine environment.
For me, if you travel, kagaya ng sinabi ni Jen, I think you can start naman sa family. I have a niece who's very, very young. So if when we travel with family, we usually go to the beach kasi walang space sa bahay. We just want to be together, hang out. We try and allow the kids to appreciate nature, the beach, the marine life, and tell them why it's important. And I have seen that naman sa efforts ng shore through the Coastal Scouts. So we teach kids what mangroves are, the seagrass, the corals, why they are important. So teaching kids to appreciate the value of these ecosystems is a big help. Kasi if we don't, yung efforts ay magsa-stop sa atin. And that's just sad. So that's one way of helping the marine ecosystem, make sure that the younger generation appreciates the value of marine life, the value of the ocean. And I agree with what Jen said. We have strong environmental laws. So na-mention ni Jen ang Solid Waste Management Act. I'll mention one more. It's the Clean Water Act. So lahat ng sources of pollution is regulated by DNR. But the companies that are actually polluting the river, the ocean, they would rather pay the fines than actually comply.
Oh.
They will pay because they have the money. And it's cheaper for them to pay than to actually do something about waste reduction, especially wastewater. So that is sad. So hindi siya ma-police. Although the law is really, really strong, but there's that. They can pay, so let's just pay. And there is still, it's money still talks. So it's at the end, it's ano yung less na costly. We save the environment by compliance, or we just pay the fines and just be done with it. So isa yun sa mga sayang. So we have really, really good laws, but sayang because the enforcement is not good. And the whole point of these laws is to protect the environment. And we really can't do that. Kung yung attitude na, pwede naman palang bayaran, why not? Bayaran na lang natin, mas tipid yun sa company. So teaching, connected to sa sinabi ni Doc Chona, you choose the company na yung source mo ng binibilhan mo ng shampoo, sabon, food, sino yung may pakialam sa environment, and we support the businesses that care for the environment. And even mas sustainable pa nga yung small industries, small businesses. So I think okay naman yung laws natin. It's the enforcement that is lacking. We don't need more laws. We just need to enforce what we have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your interesting and very insightful answers. I hope our listeners learned a lot about marine biology today. I know I did. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Chona Vince-Abeledo, Ms Princess Mordeno, and Ms Jennifer Deauna-Mendoza. We actually have a lot of other questions that we haven't gone through, and I hope that I can invite you po again for another episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms.
I hope you had fun rin po. Ang ganda ng conversation. I really like it.
Hi, Courtney here. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to know more about the terms, organizations, and people mentioned by our panelists, you can go to our show notes and read more about them there. This episode was edited by Gladine Manuel. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow Katakataka on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or on your preferred podcast app. The podcast is free. It will really help us out if you subscribe, and you can also unsubscribe anytime you want. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at KatakatakAPod. That is KATAKATAKAPOD. You can suggest topics and pass us your questions over there. This podcast is fully self-funded, and if you want to support this podcast, you can do so by going to coffee.com/katakatakapod. That is ko-fi.com/katakatakapod. Thank you and goodbye.